Hi folks, HR Funk here. I'm making this video to address a controversy, and in fact I've got several viewers who seem to be upset with me regarding the videos I've made this year with my CZ P10C. And specifically they're upset about some of the negative comments I've made regarding the P10C, and I have to say I really think probably 75, maybe 80% of what I've said about this pistol in my various videos have been positive. I think it's a pretty good pistol. I think it's very reliable. I think it is very accurate, at least mechanically accurate. I like the way it feels. I like the way it points. But my biggest criticisms that I've had regarding this pistol have to do with its trigger. And there are several things that I have not liked about the trigger, beginning with the fact that when I first got the pistol, when I would squeeze the trigger, the drop safety was dragging against the pistol's frame, and I demonstrated this in an earlier video. And it would actually pop as it snapped past that frame. Now I did correct that. I took a little bit of sandpaper and I sanded the edge of that drop safety, so I don't have that problem anymore. Now I have to say I don't think I should have had to do that, but I did do that to correct that part of the trigger. The remaining criticisms I have regarding the trigger have to do with its pull weight and its brake. And a lot of this has to do with the fact, and I talked about this also in earlier videos, that there was a lot of praise for these triggers in the P10C from a lot of people over the last several years since the P10C has been released. So I had very high expectations regarding the trigger pull quality on these pistols. And the trigger pull quality on mine has not lived up to those expectations. It is heavier than I thought it would be. Now, I'm not saying it's heavy. What I'm saying is it's heavier than I thought it was going to be, breaking somewhere around the 5-pound mark, and it's also not tremendously consistent. I'll get some pulls that are around 5 pounds, then all of a sudden I'll have one that's 5.5 or a little bit more, then sometimes I'll have one that breaks somewhat less than that. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to manage the trigger on this pistol. And I also really don't like the brake, and I have demonstrated this in a previous video, that there is noticeable creep in this trigger, meaning that after it hits the wall, and by the way, I don't like that term, what I would say is after it meets initial resistance, there is some movement in the trigger before it actually releases the striker. And I don't care for that particular quality in a trigger. I don't mind the weight as much as I dislike that creep in the trigger. And I've had a lot of people tell me that, well, I should check out other CZ P10s and see what the triggers are like on those because they're vastly superior to mine. I've had people telling me that my pistol is definitely broken, that it needs to go back to CZ for repair. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they have swapped out the trigger in their P10 for some sort of an aftermarket trigger, or at least aftermarket components. Now I know if all I wanted to do was reduce the pull weight, all I have to do is change the striker spring to a lighter striker spring, and that would reduce my trigger pull weight somewhat. But I don't like doing that with a pistol that might be used for defensive purposes because I don't want to introduce the possibility of having misfires if I have a hard primer or some other type of ammunition related issue with that light primer spring that could cause me some problems. So I don't want to swap that out. I also don't like the idea of having to do that with a brand new pistol. And I've had other people tell me, as I mentioned a moment ago, that the other P10s are vastly superior to the trigger on my P10. Well, I've mentioned that I've tested these things, or at least tried them in gun shops over the years, and they've all felt just about the same as mine. Well, a few days ago, I was in a gun shop and there was a brand new P10 there. Now, something else folks have said is that the triggers from the Czech-made CZs are superior to those made in the United States. And mine, being an optics-ready CZ P10C, was made here in the United States. So I saw a pistol in the display case. It's a brand new P10. In this case, it was a P10F, and it was a Czech-made pistol. So I was really interested to try the trigger on that particular pistol and see if it was going to be superior to the trigger on my P10C. And what I have to tell you is I felt that exact same trigger creep in that P10F that I feel in my P10C. That trigger also felt like it was about the same weight as my P10C. which once again verifies what I've seen with the other CZ P10s that I've tried over the years. And I really don't think mine is an anomaly. I think it really represents what these triggers feel like. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the last portion of the trigger pull after it meets the wall has to complete the cocking of the striker. That's what I'm feeling in that creep. It is pushing back on that striker, and I'm feeling that in the trigger. There is definitely noticeable movement that takes place as I'm doing that. And then once it releases the striker, then obviously the trigger is not moving anymore. So there's not really any over travel that I'm noticing, but I'm noticing that pre-ignition movement in the trigger, which is something I don't care for. So again, I think a lot of this comes back to the fact that this is just the design of these pistols. Now, again, I think overall they're pretty good pistols, but they just don't have the triggers in them that I thought they were going to have. So for all of you who have been upset with me, I'm sorry. This video is probably not going to do anything to make you any more happy with me, but I did want to report that I tried another CZ P10 and I felt the same exact type of trigger quality that I'm feeling in the one that I have here. And I have a feeling if I lined up 10 different P10s, I would probably feel that same trigger movement in those. Now I will say that I'm aware of the fact that CZ has changed some of the components in their trigger since the very early P10s were released, now probably 4, maybe 5 years ago. And maybe if you have an original P10C from back in the day, it has a better trigger, and if so, I would encourage you to make a video and demonstrate that you don't see any of that pre-ignition movement in your trigger or creep. And you can also weigh the trigger and demonstrate what the trigger pull weight is and everything else. But in the pistols that I've tried, the triggers all feel about the same, so I wanted to update my videos with this most recent experience with a different P10, this time a Czech-made P10F, where I saw the exact same type of trigger. In any case, that's my video for today. Let the wailing and gnashing of teeth begin.